When single father Daniel Hayes rescued a mysterious woman from a stormy highway, he thought he was saving a stranger. He had no idea he'd just found the missing billionaire heiress who vanished 20 years ago, or that the people who took her would kill to keep her silent. This is a story of buried secrets, dangerous enemies, and a love that defies all odds. The headlights carved through the darkness like twin blades cutting across the rain-soaked asphalt of Highway 285 as Daniel Hayes gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning what should have been a routine drive home from Denver into a nightmare of reduced visibility and treacherous roads. In the passenger seat, his 8-year-old daughter Emma slept peacefully, her head resting against the window, blissfully unaware of the weather chaos surrounding them. Daniel squinted through the windshield, the wipers working overtime against the relentless downpour. He was bone-tired after a long day of job interviews, 3 rejections and one maybe that felt more like a polite no. Being a single father in a small Colorado town wasn't easy, especially when your military background didn't translate well to civilian jobs that actually paid the bills. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, leaning forward to peer through the rain. "Just get us home safe." That's when he saw her. At first, Daniel thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Through the wall of rain illuminated for just a split second by his headlights, stood a figure in the middle of the road. A woman perfectly still, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Jesus Christ! Daniel slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding sideways on the wet pavement. The ABS kicked in the pedal, vibrating under his foot as he fought to maintain control. The truck came to a stop just feet from the figure, steam rising from the overheated brakes. Emma stirred in her seat. "Daddy, what happened?" "Stay here, sweetheart," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Don't get out of the truck, okay?" He grabbed his jacket from the back seat and pushed open the door, immediately getting soaked by the driving rain. The figure hadn't moved. As Daniel approached, his headlights revealed more details that made his stomach clench with worry. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long auburn hair plastered to her skull by the rain. Her clothes, a simple white dress that might have been elegant once, were torn and muddy. But what struck Daniel most was her complete stillness. She wasn't seeking shelter, wasn't trying to flag him down for help. She was just standing there barefoot on the cold asphalt, staring straight ahead with pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through him. "Ma'am?" Daniel called out, having to raise his voice over the storm. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned her head slowly, as if movement required tremendous effort. When their eyes met, Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. There was something haunting in her gaze, not just confusion, but a deep, hollow emptiness that spoke of trauma he couldn't begin to imagine. She began, her voice barely audible over the wind. Where am I?" Daniel stepped closer, noting the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You're on Highway 285, about 20 miles south of Fairplay. What's your name? How did you get here?" She blinked slowly, rainwater streaming down her face like tears. I can't remember." "You can't remember your name?" "I can't remember anything." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. There was music, piano music, and then nothing. Daniel's military training kicked in. This woman was in shock, possibly hypothermic, and definitely in need of immediate medical attention. But the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in good weather. In this storm, it would take over an hour. She needed warmth and shelter, and she needed it now. "Listen to me," he said gently, taking her arm. "My name is Daniel Hayes. You're safe now, okay? I'm going to take you somewhere warm." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. For a moment something flickered in her eyes, gratitude maybe, or relief. "Daniel," she repeated softly, as if testing how the name felt. "That's right. What's your name?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. Clara. I think my name is Clara." "Okay, Clara. Let's get you out of this rain." Daniel guided her to the passenger side of his truck, helping her climb into the back seat, while Emma watched with wide, curious eyes from the front. "Daddy, why is the lady all wet?" Emma asked as Daniel climbed back behind the wheel, cranking up the heat. "She got caught in the storm, honey," Daniel said, meeting Clara's eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going to help her, okay?" Emma nodded solemnly, then turned in her seat to face Clara. "Hi, I'm Emma. Are you hurt?" Clara's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, the first expression Daniel had seen cross her face. "Hello, Emma. No, I don't think I'm hurt. Just lost." As Daniel pulled back onto the highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. There was something about Clara that didn't add up. The quality of her voice, despite her obvious distress, spoke of education and refinement. Her hands, though dirty now, showed no signs of manual labor. Even her posture, slumped as she was against the seat, suggested someone accustomed to carrying herself with dignity. But it was more than that. There was something familiar about her, though Daniel was certain they'd never met. Maybe it was the way she held her head, or the particular shade of her eyes, but something about Clara nagged at the edges of his memory. "Where do you live?" he asked, glancing at her in the mirror. Clara pressed her fingers to her temples, her face scrunching in concentration. I don't know. I remember a house, but I can't see it clearly. There were stairs, marble stairs, and a chandelier." She paused, looking confused. "But that doesn't seem right. It feels like someone else's memory." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Marble stairs and chandeliers weren't exactly common in small-town Colorado. "What about family, friends, anyone who might be looking for you?" "I don't know." The words came out strangled, heavy with frustration and fear. "I don't know anything. It's like I just started existing 20 minutes ago." Emma reached back and patted Clara's knee with the unconscious kindness that only children possessed. "It's okay. Daddy will help you remember. He's really good at fixing things." Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. After Emma's mother had died 3 years ago, he'd sworn to protect his daughter from the harsh realities of the world. Taking in a stranger with no memory, no identification, and no apparent means of support was exactly the kind of risk he should avoid. But looking at Clara in the mirror, seeing the lost, haunted expression in her eyes, Daniel knew he couldn't just drop her off at the police station or the hospital and walk away. There was something vulnerable about her that called to his protective instincts, the same instincts that had made him a good soldier, and he hoped a good father. "We'll figure it out," he said, making the decision even as the words left his mouth. "You can stay with us tonight, get warmed up and rested. Maybe things will come back to you in the morning." Clara's eyes filled with tears, the first real emotion he'd seen from her. "You don't even know me. Why would you help me?" Daniel thought about that for a moment, as he turned onto the dirt road that led to his small ranch house. Why was he helping her? It certainly wasn't the practical thing to do. A woman with amnesia could be dangerous, could be running from the law, could be mentally ill. But something in his gut told him that Clara was genuinely in trouble, that whatever had happened to her had been beyond her control. "Because that's what people do," he said finally. We help each other. The house came into view through the rain, a modest two-story structure that Daniel had been slowly renovating since buying it with his military savings. It wasn't much, but it was home, and right now it represented safety and warmth for a woman who clearly needed both. Daniel parked in the driveway and killed the engine. "Emma, can you run inside and get some dry clothes? Maybe one of your bigger t-shirts and some sweatpants." "On it, Daddy." Emma bounded out of the truck and up the front steps, her excitement at having a mysterious house guest overriding any concerns about the late hour. Daniel opened Clara's door and helped her out of the truck. She moved slowly, as if her body didn't quite belong to her, and he noticed her hands were shaking, whether from cold or shock he couldn't tell. "Careful on the steps," he said, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow. "They get slippery when it's wet." Inside the house was warm and welcoming with soft lighting from table lamps and the lingering scent of the dinner Daniel had cooked earlier. Clara stood in the entryway dripping onto the hardwood floor and looked around with an expression of wonder. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It feels safe." Daniel followed her gaze, seeing his home through her eyes. The living room, with its comfortable but well-worn furniture, the stone fireplace where Emma's drawings were displayed on the mantel, the kitchen visible through an archway where morning sunlight would stream through gingham curtains. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love and the particular warmth that came from being truly lived in. "It's not much," Daniel said, suddenly self-conscious about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter and the toy horses Emma had left scattered across the coffee table. "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "It's perfect. It's real." Emma came thundering down the stairs with an armload of clothes. "Here, these should fit. And I brought some fuzzy socks because your feet looked cold." Clara accepted the clothes with trembling hands, looking at Emma as if she were some kind of miracle. "Thank you. You're very kind." "Daddy says kindness is the most important thing," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Well, after safety. Safety first, then kindness." Daniel felt his throat tighten. His daughter's innocent generosity, her complete acceptance of this stranger in their home, reminded him why he'd fought so hard to give her a stable, loving environment after her mother's death. "The bathroom is just down the hall," he told Clara. "Take your time getting cleaned up. I'll make some hot tea." As Clara disappeared into the bathroom, Daniel busied himself in the kitchen, putting the kettle on and trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 20 minutes, he'd gone from driving home in a storm to harboring a mysterious woman with no memory. The rational part of his mind was screaming warnings. What if she was dangerous? What if someone was looking for her? What if he'd just put Emma at risk? But the larger part of him, the part that had been shaped by loss and hardship, and the fundamental belief that people were basically good, told him he'd done the right thing. "Daddy!" Emma appeared at his side, having changed into her pajamas. "Is Clara going to be okay?" Daniel crouched down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that were so much like her mother's. It sometimes took his breath away. "I don't know, sweetheart. She's been through something scary and she can't remember what it was. But we're going to take care of her, okay? Like when we found that hurt bird in the yard." Daniel smiled. "Something like that. We helped the bird get better, and then it was able to fly away. Maybe we can help Clara remember where she belongs." Emma nodded solemnly. "I hope she doesn't fly away too fast. I like her." The bathroom door opened and Clara emerged wearing Emma's oversized Colorado State t-shirt and a pair of Daniel's old sweatpants that Emma must have grabbed by mistake. The clothes hung loose on her slight frame, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and her hair, now dried and brushed, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. For a moment, Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Clean and dry, Clara was strikingly beautiful, not in the obvious way that turned heads on the street, but with a kind of refined elegance that seemed completely at odds with her circumstances. There was something almost ethereal about her, as if she'd stepped out of a painting or a dream. "Better?" he asked, forcing himself to look away and focus on pouring the tea. "Much better. Thank you." Clara sat carefully at the kitchen table, moving with the kind of unconscious grace that spoke of years of training or practice. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for your kindness." "You don't need to repay anything," Daniel said, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "Just focus on getting better." Clara wrapped her hands around the mug, inhaling the steam. "Chamomile," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. I think I like chamomile tea." "That's good," Emma said, climbing into the chair next to Clara. "That's a memory." Clara smiled, a real smile this time, not just the ghost of one. "You're right. It is a memory." She took a sip of the tea and her eyes fluttered closed. "It tastes like comfort, like being safe." Daniel settled into his own chair, cradling his coffee and studying Clara's face. Now that she was clean and warmed up, he could see details that had been hidden by the rain and mud. There was a small scar along her jawline, barely visible, but perfectly straight, as if it had been made by something sharp. Her hands, wrapped around the tea mug, were soft and uncalloused, with perfectly manicured nails that spoke of a life free from manual labor. But it was her eyes that drew his attention. They were an unusual shade of pale blue, almost gray, and there was an intelligence in them that suggested education and sophistication. Even confused and frightened as she was, Clara carried herself like someone accustomed to respect, to being listened to and taken seriously. "Clara," Daniel said gently, "I need to ask you some questions. Just simple things that might help us figure out where you came from." She nodded, setting down her mug. "Of course. Do you remember anything about today before you were standing on the road?" Clara closed her eyes, concentrating. "There was music. Piano music. Something classical, but I can't place the piece. And there was a woman's voice calling my name. But not Clara, something else. Something that started with an S, I think. Sophie, Sarah, Susan. Clara pressed her fingers to her temples again. "I can't quite catch it. It's like trying to remember a dream." "That's okay. What about before today? Any memories of family, friends, work? Fragments. Pieces that don't make sense." Clara's voice was soft, distant. "I remember a big house with white columns, a piano in a room with tall windows, someone teaching me to dance, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, and—" She paused, her face clouding with confusion. "I remember being afraid, really afraid, but I don't know why." Emma reached over and took Clara's hand. "It's okay to be afraid sometimes. When my mom died, I was afraid all the time. But Daddy made it better." Clara looked down at Emma's small hand in hers, and Daniel saw tears gathering in her eyes again. "Thank you, Emma. You're very wise for someone so young." "I'm 8, Emma said proudly. "Daddy says that's old enough to help people who are sad." Daniel felt that familiar tightness in his chest again. Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of Clara, her instinctive kindness, reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her mother in the first place. Sarah had possessed that same generous spirit, that immediate compassion for anyone in need. "Emma, it's way past your bedtime," Daniel said, glancing at the clock on the microwave. "Why don't you go brush your teeth? I'll be up to tuck you in a few minutes." Emma nodded, but didn't immediately move to leave. Instead, she looked seriously at Clara. "Are you going to be here in the morning?" Clara glanced at Daniel, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. If your father doesn't mind, I'd like to stay, just until I remember where I belong. Of course you can stay, Emma said with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. We have a guest room. It has a window that looks out at the mountains. After Emma had gone upstairs, the kitchen fell into a comfortable silence. Clara sipped her tea while Daniel tried to figure out what came next. He should probably call the police, let them know he'd found someone who appeared to be suffering from amnesia. They'd take a report, maybe run her fingerprints, see if anyone had filed a missing person report. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way Clara had flinched when he'd mentioned calling for help earlier. Maybe it was his military-honed instinct that told him there was more to this story than simple memory loss. Or maybe it was just the way she looked sitting at his kitchen table, fragile but dignified, lost but not broken. Clara, he said finally, I want you to know that you're safe here. Whatever happened to you, whoever you're running from, if you're running from someone, you don't have to face it alone. Clara's eyes widened. What makes you think I'm running from someone? Call it intuition. 20 years in the army teaches you to read people, to sense when someone's been through trauma. You didn't just lose your memory, Clara. Something happened to you. Something bad. Clara set down her mug with shaking hands. There are flashes, images that don't make sense. A woman with dark hair and cold eyes. A needle. The taste of something bitter. She looked up at Daniel, fear naked in her face. What if I'm not a good person? What if I did something terrible? You didn't, Daniel said with absolute certainty. I don't know how I know that, but I do. Whatever happened to you, you were the victim, not the perpetrator. How can you be so sure? Daniel studied her face, the way she held herself, the gentleness with which she'd interacted with Emma, the genuine gratitude in her voice when she thanked him for the smallest kindnesses. Because Emma likes you, and that kid has never been wrong about people. She has a gift for seeing straight to someone's heart. Clara's smile was watery but genuine. She's amazing, so smart and kind. You've done a wonderful job raising her. I've done my best. Being a single parent isn't easy, but Emma makes it worth every sacrifice. What happened to her mother, if you don't mind me asking? Daniel was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. He didn't usually talk about Sarah with strangers, but something about Clara invited confidence. Maybe it was her complete lack of judgment, or the way she listened with her whole attention, but he found himself wanting to share. Cancer, he said finally. Aggressive, fast-moving. By the time they caught it, there wasn't much they could do. Sarah fought for 2 years, but he shrugged, the gesture encompassing all the pain and loss that words couldn't capture. I'm so sorry, Clara said softly. That must have been devastating for both of you. Emma was only 5 when Sarah died. I was deployed when she got sick, and by the time I got home, Daniel stopped shaking his head. I left the army after that. Emma needed me more than my country did. Clara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her touch was warm, comforting, and Daniel felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for years. She's lucky to have you, Clara said. Not every child who loses a parent has someone willing to give up everything for them. I didn't give up everything. I just changed priorities. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the ticking of the kitchen clock and the settling of the old house around them. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. Daniel, Clara said eventually, what if my memory doesn't come back? What if I never remember who I am or where I came from? Then you'll figure out who you want to be going forward, Daniel said. Memory isn't just about the past, Clara. It's about the choices you make every day, the person you decide to become. And from what I've seen tonight, you're already someone worth knowing. Clara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than fear. I don't know what I did to deserve this kindness. You don't have to deserve kindness, Clara. That's what makes it kindness. Upstairs, Emma called out, Daddy, I'm ready for bed. Daniel stood gathering the empty mugs. I should go tuck her in. Will you be okay down here for a few minutes? Of course. I think I'll just sit here and try to remember more about that piano music. Daniel paused at the kitchen doorway. Clara. Whatever comes back to you, whatever you remember, we'll deal with it together, okay? You're not alone anymore. As Daniel climbed the stairs to Emma's room, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a dramatic turn. In his gut, he knew that Clara was running from something dangerous, something that could potentially threaten the peaceful life he'd built for himself and Emma. But he also knew that walking away wasn't an option. There was something about Clara that called to his protective instincts, something that made him want to stand between her and whatever shadows she was fleeing. In Emma's room, his daughter was already under the covers, her stuffed horse clutched against her chest. Is Clara going to sleep in the guest room? Emma asked, as Daniel sat on the edge of her bed. Yes, sweetheart. Just for tonight, until we figure out where she belongs. Emma was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Daniel with serious eyes. Daddy, I think Clara belongs with us. Daniel felt his breath catch. What makes you say that? She looks at you the way Mommy used to, and she looks at me like I'm special. People who look at us like that belong with us. Daniel smoothed Emma's hair back from her forehead, marveling at his daughter's wisdom. We'll see, baby girl. We'll see. As he kissed Emma goodnight and turned off her light, Daniel wondered if his daughter might be right. Maybe Clara did belong with them. Maybe fate had put her in their path for a reason. But as he made his way back downstairs, Daniel couldn't ignore the nagging worry that Clara's past would catch up with her, and when it did, it might destroy the fragile peace they'd all found together. In the kitchen, Clara was exactly where he'd left her, staring out the window at the storm clouds beginning to clear. When she heard his footsteps, she turned to him with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. I know taking in a stranger isn't easy, especially when you have a daughter to protect. Emma seems to think you belong here, Daniel said, settling back into his chair. Clara's smile was soft and wondering. She's an extraordinary child. You both are extraordinary people. I just hope... She trailed off, shaking her head. Hope what? I hope that when I remember who I am, I'm someone worthy of this kindness. I hope I'm someone who deserves a second chance. Daniel looked at her sitting in his kitchen, wearing his old clothes, her hair still damp from the rain, and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't just protectiveness anymore, though that was certainly part of it. It was something deeper, something that scared him with its intensity. We all deserve second chances, Clara, he said quietly. The question isn't whether you deserve one. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted away, revealing a sky full of stars. And in the warm glow of the kitchen, two damaged souls began the slow process of healing together. The morning sun filtered through the guest room curtains, painting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor, where Clara had spent a restless night. She'd dozed fitfully, her dreams filled with fragments that felt more like memories, the sound of heels clicking on marble, a man's voice calling her name, and always that haunting piano melody that seemed to dance just beyond her consciousness. She found Daniel in the kitchen already dressed for the day, in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, pouring coffee with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to early mornings. Emma sat at the table carefully braiding the mane of a toy horse while humming softly to herself. "Good morning," Clara said softly, not wanting to startle them. Daniel turned, and the smile that crossed his face made something warm unfurl in Clara's chest. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, considering." Clara accepted the mug of coffee he offered, inhaling the rich aroma. "This smells wonderful." "Daddy makes the best coffee in Colorado," Emma announced without looking up from her horse. "That's what Mrs. Whitmore says, and she's lived here for like 100 years. Daniel chuckled. "Mrs. Whitmore is our neighbor. She's actually only 73, but don't tell her I told you that. She likes people to think she's ancient and wise." Clara settled into a chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The simple domestic scene felt both foreign and achingly familiar, as if she'd dreamed of mornings like this, but never experienced them. "Does she know about me?" "I called her early this morning," Daniel said, his expression growing serious. "Not with details, just to let her know we have a house guest who might need some help. Esther Whitmore used to be a social worker before she retired. If anyone in this town can help us figure out next steps, it's her." As if summoned by their conversation, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Emma jumped up, her horse forgotten. "That's Mrs. Whitmore. She always knocks like she's trying to wake the dead." Daniel opened the door to reveal a petite woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore a practical wool coat and carried a basket that smelled of fresh baking. "Esther," Daniel said warmly, "come in." "Don't mind if I do," Mrs. Whitmore said, stepping inside and immediately fixing her sharp gaze on Clara. "And you must be the young lady Daniel called about." Clara stood suddenly conscious of her borrowed clothes and uncertain status. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Clara." Mrs. Whitmore studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the uncomfortable feeling of being dissected by a particularly astute scientist. The older woman said finally. "Interesting." "What's interesting?" Emma asked, bouncing on her toes with curiosity. "Your friend Clara has very good posture," Mrs. Whitmore said, setting her basket on the kitchen counter. "The kind that comes from years of training. Dance lessons, perhaps, or finishing school." Clara blinked in surprise. I don't know. Maybe also." Mrs. Whitmore continued unpacking what appeared to be fresh muffins from her basket. "She speaks with a very slight accent. Not local. East Coast, I'd say. Educated. Refined." Daniel leaned against the counter, watching the interaction with interest. "You picked up all that from 30 seconds. 40 years of social work teaches you to observe Daniel Hayes. People reveal more about themselves in the first minute than they realize." Mrs. Whitmore turned back to Clara. "Now, dear Daniel tells me you're having some memory difficulties." Clara sank back into her chair, feeling suddenly exposed. "I can't remember anything before last night. Not my real name, where I'm from, who my family is. Nothing." Mrs. Whitmore poured herself a cup of coffee and settled at the table across from Clara. "But you do remember some things. You knew this was chamomile tea last night without being told. You recognized good posture when I mentioned it. Your memories aren't gone, dear, they're just locked away." "How do I unlock them?" "Sometimes they come back on their own. Sometimes they need a trigger, a smell, a sound, a familiar place." Mrs. Whitmore's expression grew more serious. "And sometimes they don't come back, because the mind is protecting itself from something too painful to remember. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock and Emma's soft humming as she returned to her toy. Clara stared into her coffee, trying to process the implications of Mrs. Whitmore's words. "What if I don't want to remember?" Clara asked quietly. "What if my past is something terrible?" "Then you deal with it when you're strong enough," Mrs. Whitmore said firmly. "But hiding from the truth never works in the long run, dear. It has a way of finding you whether you're ready or not." Daniel moved to stand behind Clara's chair, his presence warm and reassuring. "Whatever we find out, we'll handle it together." Mrs. Whitmore's keen eyes flickered between them, and Clara caught a knowing smile tugging at the corners of the older woman's mouth. "Well then," she said briskly, "I suppose we should start by seeing if anyone's reported you missing." For the next hour, they made calls to the local police, the State Patrol missing persons databases. Daniel sat beside Clara at his computer, patiently walking through websites and forms, while Mrs. Whitmore kept Emma entertained with stories and games. "Nothing," Daniel said, finally leaning back in his chair. "No missing person reports that match your description. No one's looking for you, at least not officially." Clara felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of her had hoped for answers for someone desperately searching for her, but another part was afraid of what those answers might bring. "That doesn't necessarily mean anything," Mrs. Whitmore said, looking up from the puzzle she was working on with Emma. "Rich people don't always go to the police when family members disappear. They hire private investigators, use their own resources." "Rich people?" Clara asked. "Your clothes, dear. What was left of them? Even muddy and torn, I could tell they were expensive. That dress you were wearing, I'd guess it cost more than most people make in a month." Clara tried to remember the white dress, but it was just another blank space in her mind. "I don't feel rich." "Trauma can change how we see ourselves," Mrs. Whitmore said gently. "Sometimes forgetting is the mind's way of starting over." The conversation was interrupted by Emma's excited gasp. Look at this." She was holding up a section of the newspaper, pointing to something in the corner of the page. Daniel took it from her, his expression growing serious as he read. "What is it?" Clara asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Daniel held up the paper so she could see. It was a small article from the society pages, accompanied by a grainy photo of a charity gala. The headline read, "Local philanthropists gather for Children's Hospital fundraiser." "I don't understand," Clara said, studying the photo. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" "Look at the woman in the background," Mrs. Whitmore said, moving to peer over Clara's shoulder. "Third from the left, partially hidden behind the man in the tuxedo." Clara squinted at the image and her breath caught. Even partially obscured and grainy from the newspaper's poor reproduction, she could see enough of the woman's profile to recognize something familiar. The shape of her nose, the way she held her head. "That's you," Emma said with certainty. "That's totally you." Clara's hands began to shake as she stared at the photo. Maybe it's hard to tell." The caption says the photo was taken last month at the Denver Children's Hospital Gala, Daniel read. "But it doesn't identify anyone except the main speakers." Mrs. Whitmore was already reaching for her purse. "I have a friend who works at the hospital's development office. Let me make a call." While Mrs. Whitmore stepped outside to use her phone, Clara continued staring at the newspaper photo. Something about it felt significant, important, but she couldn't grasp why. "Does it look like you?" Daniel asked softly. "I think so, maybe. I keep feeling like I should know this place, this event, but it's like trying to remember a dream." Clara set the paper down with frustration. "What if I never remember? What if this is just how I am now?" Daniel's hand found hers across the table, his fingers warm and steady. Then we figure out who you want to be going forward. Clara Hayes has a nice ring to it. The comment was clearly meant to be light teasing, but something in Daniel's eyes suggested he wasn't entirely joking. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized the implication of what he'd said. Mrs. Whitmore's return cut off whatever Clara had been about to say. The older woman's expression was grim as she settled back at the table. "Well," Daniel asked, "my friend Margaret remembers the gala. She said there was indeed a young woman who matched Clara's description, but she wasn't on the guest list. Margaret assumed she was someone's +1 or perhaps working for one of the catering companies. So it might not be me after all," Clara said, feeling oddly deflated. "Or," Mrs. Whitmore said carefully, "you were there unofficially. Margaret did mention something else. There was some kind of disturbance that night. Nothing serious, but security had to escort someone out. A woman who seemed confused or possibly intoxicated." Clara's blood ran cold. "When? What time?" "Late in the evening. Margaret said it was unusual, because the woman seemed well-dressed and articulate, but she kept insisting she didn't belong there, that someone had made a mistake." The kitchen fell silent as the implications sank in. Clara pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to force the memories to surface, but there was nothing but that maddening blankness. "We need to go to Denver," Daniel said suddenly. "To the hospital. Maybe seeing the place will trigger something." "Daniel, you don't have to," Clara began. "Yes, I do." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "We're going to figure this out, Clara. All of it." Mrs. Whitmore looked between them with that knowing expression again. "I'll watch Emma. You two take as long as you need." An hour later, Clara found herself in Daniel's truck watching the Colorado landscape roll past as they headed toward Denver. She'd insisted on wearing her own clothes, now clean and mended, despite their condition, hoping the familiar fabric might spark some recognition. "Nervous?" Daniel asked, glancing over at her. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if we find out something I don't want to know? Then we deal with it. Together." That word "together" sent warmth through Clara's chest. In the 24 hours since Daniel had found her on that rain-soaked highway, he'd become her anchor, the steady presence that kept her from drowning in uncertainty. "Daniel," she said quietly, "what happens if I remember everything? If I remember that I have a husband, children, a whole life somewhere else?" Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. "Then we help you get back to them. And if I don't want to go back?" This time Daniel did look at her, his dark eyes intense. "What are you saying?" Clara turned to stare out the passenger window, watching the mountains rise in the distance. "I'm saying that for the first time since I woke up in that storm, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I know that sounds crazy considering I've known you for less than a day, but sitting at your kitchen table this morning, listening to Emma chatter about her horses, it felt like home. Clara, I know it's not fair to you or Emma. I know I could be anyone, could have done anything. But whatever my past holds, I can't imagine it being better than what I've found with you." Daniel pulled the truck into a rest stop and turned to face her fully. "Look at me," he said softly. Clara met his eyes, seeing her own confused emotions reflected back at her. "I feel it too," Daniel said. "This thing between us, whatever it is, it scares the hell out of me because I swore I'd never let anyone else into Emma's life unless I was absolutely certain they'd stay. But with you, it's like you've always been part of our family." "Then why do we have to go to Denver?" Why can't we just not know? Daniel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Because secrets have a way of destroying the very thing you're trying to protect. If we're going to have a future together, Clara, it has to be built on truth, all of it. The Denver Children's Hospital was a sprawling complex of modern buildings connected by glass walkways. As they walked through the main entrance, Clara felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if she'd been here before, but in a different context. The development office was located on the 3rd floor, and Margaret turned out to be a kind woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a warm smile. She examined the newspaper photo carefully, then looked at Clara with growing recognition. "Oh my goodness," Margaret said softly. "You're her. You're the woman from the gala." Clara's heart began to race. "You remember me? How could I forget? You caused quite a stir that night. You were so insistent that you didn't belong there that someone had brought you against your will. Security thought you might be having some kind of breakdown." "What else do you remember?" Daniel asked, his arm coming around Clara's shoulders in a protective gesture. Margaret frowned, clearly trying to recall details. "You kept mentioning a woman with dark hair. You said she'd given you something to drink, something that made you feel confused. And you kept asking about a piano." At the mention of the piano, Clara gasped. Suddenly, like a dam bursting, images flooded her mind. An elegant ballroom with a grand piano in the corner. A woman with perfectly styled black hair and cold, calculating eyes. The taste of something bitter in champagne. "Sophia." Clara whispered the name, escaping her lips before she could stop it. "What?" Daniel asked urgently. "She called me Sophia, the woman with the dark hair. She said." Clara pressed her hands to her head as more memories crashed over her. "She said it was time to go home. But I didn't want to go. I was afraid of her." Margaret was watching this exchange with growing concern. "Should I call someone, a doctor?" "No," Clara said quickly, though she was swaying on her feet as more fragments of memory surfaced. "I need to remember. I need to know what happened to me." For the next hour, Margaret helped them piece together what she could remember about that night. Clara, or Sophia, had arrived at the gala with an older woman who'd identified herself as the girl's guardian. Everything had seemed normal until late in the evening, when Clara had begun acting strangely, insisting she was in danger and needed help. "The woman you came with," Margaret said. "She was very persuasive. She told security that you'd been having episodes lately, that you were on medication for anxiety, and sometimes became confused. She had papers, medical documents. She seemed genuinely concerned for your welfare." "What did she look like?" Daniel asked. "Elegant. Expensive clothes, perfect makeup. The kind of woman who's used to getting her way. She had this very authoritative manner, like she was accustomed to being in charge." Clara felt sick. The memories were coming faster now, but they were fragmented, chaotic. Flashes of a mansion with white columns. A man with kind eyes who'd called her his princess. The woman with dark hair, Evelyn, standing over her bed with a needle. "I think I was kidnapped." Clara whispered the words, feeling strange and terrible in her mouth. Daniel's arm tightened around her. "What do you remember?" "Not everything, but enough." Clara looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "My name isn't Clara, it's Sophia. Sophia Laurent. And I think I've been missing for a very long time." Margaret went pale. "Laurent." "As in Laurent Industries." "The Billionaire family." Clara nodded slowly. I think my father was Charles Laurent. He died when I was 23. I remember the funeral now. Everyone in black, the endless receiving line of people offering condolences. and Evelyn was there telling me she'd take care of everything. When was this, bon? Daniel asked, though Clara could see in his eyes that he already suspected the answer. 2002, Clara whispered. It was 2002, which means… She did the math with growing horror. I've been gone for 20 years. The drive back to Fairplay was conducted in stunned silence, both of them trying to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Clara Sophia sat with her hands pressed to her temples, more memories trickling back with each passing mile. She remembered the Laurent family estate in Connecticut, the trust fund that would have made her one of the wealthiest women in America, the charitable foundation her father had left in her care. She remembered Evelyn Graves, her father's business partner and supposed friend, who'd stepped in after Charles's death to help Sophia manage her inheritance. And she remembered the night Evelyn had decided Sophia was becoming too independent, too willing to question her guardian's decisions. The drugged tea. Waking up in a private clinic being told she'd had a breakdown. Years of forced medication, of being told she was mentally unstable, of being kept isolated from anyone who might help her. She stole my life, Sophia said, as they pulled into Daniel's driveway. 20 years. She stole 20 years from me. Daniel turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the truck. Sophia, he said carefully, if what you remember is true, you're one of the richest people in America. You have resources, power, the ability to bring this woman to justice. Sophia turned to look at him, seeing the question he wasn't asking. You're wondering if I'll leave? The thought had occurred to me. Sophia reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Do you remember what you said this morning about Clara Hayes having a nice ring to it? I was joking. Were you… Sophia studied his face, seeing the uncertainty and hope warring in his expression. Because I've spent the last 20 years as a prisoner, Daniel. I've been kept away from everything that matters, love, family, the simple joy of choosing my own path. And now, when I finally have the chance to reclaim my life, I find that the life I want isn't the one that was stolen from me. Daniel's eyes searched hers. What are you saying? I'm saying that Sophia Laurent died 20 years ago in that clinic. The woman sitting in this truck, the woman who fell in love with your smile and your daughter's laugh and the way you make coffee in the morning, she's someone new. Someone who chose her own name and her own family. But your inheritance, your father's legacy, will still be there when I'm ready to deal with it. But first, I need to be strong enough to face Evelyn Graves. And I can't do that alone. Daniel brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. You won't be alone. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. As they walked toward the house, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in 20 years, hope. Not just for justice or revenge, but for the future she and Daniel could build together. Whatever demons from her past were waiting to be confronted, she was no longer afraid. She had found her strength in the most unexpected place, in the love of a soldier and his daughter, who had shown her what it meant to truly belong somewhere. Inside the house, Emma was waiting with Mrs. Whitmore, both of them clearly anxious for news. When Sophia walked through the door, Emma ran to her, immediately wrapping her arms around Sophia's waist in a fierce hug. Did you remember everything? Emma asked, looking up with worried eyes. Sophia knelt down to Emma's level, smoothing the little girl's hair. I remembered enough, sweetheart. I remembered that sometimes the most important thing isn't where you came from, but where you choose to go next. So you're staying with us. Sophia looked over Emma's head at Daniel, who was watching them with an expression of such tenderness it took her breath away. If you'll have me. Forever, Emma asked, with the absolute faith that only children possessed. Forever, Sophia promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As Mrs. Whitmore bustled around making dinner and Emma chattered about her day, Sophia felt the pieces of her new life settling into place. Tomorrow would bring challenges confronting Evelyn, reclaiming her identity, figuring out how to merge her old life with her new one. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in a warm kitchen with the man she loved, and the daughter who had already claimed a permanent place in her heart. The past might have shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She was no longer the imprisoned heiress or the lost woman on the highway. She was Clara Hayes, and she was finally truly home. The peace of that evening was shattered 3 days later when a black sedan pulled into Daniel's driveway at precisely 8 in the morning. Sophia was in the kitchen helping Emma pack her lunch for school when she caught sight of the vehicle through the window. Her blood turned to ice. "Daniel!" She called, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. He appeared from the living room, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze to the sedan. 2 figures emerged, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with perfectly styled dark hair that Sophia recognized with sickening clarity. "Emma, go to your room," Daniel said quietly, his military training evident in the calm authority of his voice. "But Daddy, now sweetheart, take your backpack and stay upstairs until I come get you." Emma must have sensed the tension because she obeyed without further protest, casting worried glances over her shoulder as she climbed the stairs. The knock on the door came exactly 30 seconds later, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the house like gunshots. Daniel positioned himself between Sophia and the door, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "remember that you're not alone anymore." Sophia nodded, drawing strength from his presence as Daniel opened the door. The woman standing on their porch was exactly as Sophia remembered. Elegant, poised, and radiating the kind of cold confidence that came from decades of getting her way. Evelyn Graves had aged well, her dark hair now showing distinguished silver streaks, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. "Sophia, darling," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Thank goodness we found you. When Dr. Morrison called to say you'd wandered away from the facility again, we were beside ourselves with worry." The man beside her, tall, thin, with the predatory look of an expensive lawyer, stepped forward. "Ms. Laurent, I'm Richard Blackwood, your legal guardian. We're here to take you home." Sophia felt Daniel tense beside her, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Evelyn's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I know you're confused. The medication changes can be so disorienting. But Dr. Morrison has adjusted your prescription, and you'll feel much better once we get you back to Willowbrook." "Willowbrook?" Daniel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "A private psychiatric facility," Blackwood explained, producing a leather portfolio from his briefcase. "Ms. Laurent has been a patient there for many years, suffering from severe mental illness that requires constant supervision." "That's a lie," Sophia said. But even as the words left her mouth, she could see the doubt creeping into Daniel's expression. These people had documentation, official-looking papers, the kind of authority that came with expensive suits and polished presentations. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice taking on a tone of practiced concern. "Sophia, you know how your episodes affect your memory. You've done this before or run away, created elaborate fantasies about being kidnapped or imprisoned. The doctors say it's your mind's way of coping with the trauma of your father's death." "Show me the papers," Daniel said, extending his hand toward Blackwood. The lawyer hesitated for just a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, but Daniel caught it. "I'm afraid patient confidentiality laws prevent me from sharing specific medical information with unauthorized individuals. Then you can leave, Daniel said flatly. This is my property, and Sophia is my guest. She's made it clear she doesn't want to go with you. Evelyn's mask of concern slipped slightly. Mr. Hayes, isn't it? I understand you mean well, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. Sophia is extremely unwell. She's been known to become violent, to hurt herself and others. Keeping her here puts your daughter at risk. Sophia felt something crack inside her chest at the mention of Emma. Don't you dare, she whispered, but Evelyn continued relentlessly. The last time she had an episode, she nearly killed a nurse, set fire to her room. The doctors had to sedate her for 3 days. Evelyn's voice was smooth, practiced, convincing. I know she seems lucid now, but that's the nature of her condition. She can appear perfectly normal for weeks, even months, and then… Stop! Sophia's voice cut through Evelyn's litany of lies like a blade. Just stop. But the damage was done. She could see it in Daniel's face, not doubt about her exactly, but uncertainty about what was best for Emma. The protective father in him was warring with his feelings for Sophia, and Evelyn had known exactly which pressure point to hit. Perhaps, Blackwood said smoothly, we could discuss this more privately. Mr. Hayes, surely you understand that a man in your position, a single father with limited resources, can't provide the kind of specialized care Mrs. Laurent requires. What's that supposed to mean? Daniel's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Well, Blackwood spread his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. There's the matter of your military discharge, medical reasons. Wasn't it? PTSD can be so unpredictable. And then there's your current employment situation, or rather lack thereof. The state takes a very dim view of unstable home environments when children are involved. The threat was clear, and Sophia felt sick. They weren't just coming for her, they were threatening Emma, threatening the life Daniel had built for his daughter. You bastards, she breathed. Stepping forward, but Daniel's hand on her arm stopped her. It's okay, he said quietly, though his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. They're leaving, now. Evelyn's smile was triumphant. Of course, Mr. Hayes. We'll give you some time to think about what's best for everyone involved. But Sophia, darling, you know we can't wait forever. Your trust fund requires active management, and there are decisions that need to be made. My trust fund. Sophia felt a chill of understanding wash over her. $20 billion is a significant responsibility, Blackwood said. Far too much for someone in your condition to handle alone. Fortunately, Ms. Graves has been an excellent steward of your assets all these years. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The trust fund, the inheritance. Evelyn hadn't just stolen Sophia's life, she'd been stealing her money. Using Sophia's supposed mental illness as cover for embezzlement on a massive scale. Get off my property, Daniel said, his voice deadly calm. And if you come back without a court order signed by a judge, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Evelyn's facade finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're interfering with, she hissed. Sophia Laurent is a very sick woman, and she belongs in an institution. One way or another, she's coming home with us. Over my dead body, Daniel replied. Something flickered across Evelyn's face, calculation perhaps, or consideration of options. That could be arranged, she said softly, then seemed to catch herself. What I mean is, Mr. Hayes, accidents do happen to people who get involved in situations beyond their understanding. The threat was unmistakable, and Sophia saw red. 20 years of suppressed rage, of forced compliance, of being told she was crazy when she knew she was sane, erupted all at once. "You poisoned me," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "You drugged me, locked me away, stole my inheritance, and destroyed my life. And now you're threatening the man I love and his daughter." Evelyn's eyes went cold as winter. "Careful, Sophia. We wouldn't want another episode in front of witnesses." But Sophia was beyond caring about threats or consequences. "There won't be another episode because there never was a first one. You made it all up. The mental illness, the dangerous behavior, all of it. You needed me declared incompetent so you could control my money." "Prove it," Blackwood said with supreme confidence. "You have no evidence, no witnesses, no documentation of any wrongdoing. All you have are the delusional ramblings of a mentally ill woman with a history of false accusations." Daniel stepped forward, and for a moment Sophia thought he might actually hit the lawyer. "I think it's time for you to leave." "Indeed," Evelyn said, her composure restored. "But we'll be back, Sophia. And next time, we'll bring proper authority. You can't run from your responsibilities forever." As the black sedan pulled out of the driveway, Sophia collapsed into Daniel's arms, shaking with adrenaline and terror. "They're going to take me back," she whispered against his chest. "They have money lawyers' fake medical records. Who's going to believe me over them?" Daniel held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair. "We'll figure it out. There has to be evidence somewhere, something that proves what they did to you." 20 years, Daniel. They've had 20 years to cover their tracks, to create a paper trail that makes me look insane. Sophia pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "And they threatened Emma. I can't let them hurt her because of me." "Nobody's going to hurt Emma," Daniel said firmly. "And nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." From upstairs came the sound of a door opening, followed by Emma's voice calling down uncertainly. "Daddy, is it safe to come down now?" Daniel looked at Sophia, who quickly wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. The last thing Emma needed was to see the adults in her life falling apart. "It's safe, sweetheart," Daniel called back. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her backpack still clutched in her small hands. "Who were those people? They looked mean." Sophia forced a smile. "Just some people from my past, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." But Emma, with the uncanny perceptiveness of children, wasn't fooled. "They want to take you away, don't they?" The simple question hit Sophia like a physical blow. She knelt down as Emma reached the bottom of the stairs, meeting the little girl at eye level. "They think they do," Sophia said carefully. "But I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now with you and your daddy." Emma studied Sophia's face with serious 8-year-old eyes. "Promise. I promise." As Daniel drove Emma to school, Sophia called Mrs. Whitmore, who arrived within minutes, wearing a grim expression and carrying what appeared to be a small arsenal of legal documents. "I've been making some calls," the older woman announced without preamble. "Old friends in social services, contacts in the legal community. What those people are trying to do to you is called guardianship abuse, and it's more common than you might think." Sophia felt a flicker of hope. "You believe me? Honey, I've been watching people for 73 years. I know predators when I see them." Mrs. Whitmore spread her documents across Daniel's kitchen table. "Now the good news is that guardianship laws have changed significantly since 2002. It's much harder now to keep someone institutionalized against their will without proper medical evidence." "But they have medical evidence," Sophia said. "Fake records, but official-looking ones." Which brings us to the bad news. Overturning 20 years of legal guardianship is going to require more than just your word against theirs. We need proof of fraud, evidence of abuse documentation that shows their claims about your mental state were fabricated. Sophia sank into a chair, feeling overwhelmed. Where do we even start? With this, Mrs. Whitmore said, producing a business card. James Crawford, investigative journalist for the Denver Post. He specializes in exposing corruption among the wealthy elite. I called him this morning, and he's very interested in your story. A reporter? Sophia felt a chill of apprehension. What if he doesn't believe me either? Then we find someone who will. But Crawford has a reputation for taking on cases that other people won't touch. If there's evidence to be found, he'll find it. When Daniel returned from dropping Emma at school, he found Sophia and Mrs. Whitmore deep in conversation with a lean, sharp-eyed man in his 40s who introduced himself as James Crawford. Miss Laurent, Crawford said, rising to shake Daniel's hand. I've been hearing some fascinating things about your situation. Daniel settled beside Sophia immediately, taking her hand in a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the journalist. I've done some preliminary research, Crawford continued, and there are already some interesting inconsistencies in the public record. For instance, according to Connecticut state filings, you've been declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized since 2003. But there are also records showing you've been making charitable donations and business decisions as recently as last year. Sophia's heart leaped. That's impossible. I've been locked up for 20 years. Exactly. Which suggests that either you've been making these decisions from your supposed psychiatric facility, or someone's been forging your signature on legal documents. Crawford's smile was sharp as a blade. Either scenario raises some very interesting questions about the legitimacy of your guardianship. What kind of donations? Daniel asked. Crawford consulted his notes. $50 million to various children's charities last year alone. All signed with your name, Ms. Laurent, all approved by your supposed guardian for your mental health treatment costs. Mental health treatment that costs $50 million a year. Mrs. Whitmore snorted. That's ridiculous, even by medical industry standards. It gets better, Crawford continued. I also found records of a private jet registered to the Laurent Trust, making frequent trips between Connecticut and Switzerland. Specifically to Zurich, where there are several banks that specialize in, let's call them, discrete financial services. Sophia felt sick. She's been moving my money offshore. That's what it looks like. But here's the thing, all of these transactions required your signature as the trust beneficiary. Which means either you've been coherent enough to make complex financial decisions while supposedly suffering from severe mental illness, or someone's been committing fraud on a massive scale. Daniel leaned forward. How do we prove it? We need to get you in front of a judge for a competency hearing, Crawford said. If you can demonstrate that you're mentally sound and have been for years, it calls the entire guardianship into question. But won't they just say I'm having a lucid period? Sophia asked. From what I remember about psychiatric law, even severely mentally ill people can have times when they seem normal. They could try that argument, Mrs. Whitmore said. But not if we can prove that your supposed illness was fabricated from the beginning. Crawford nodded. I've already put in requests for your medical records from Willowbrook. If there are inconsistencies in your treatment history, or if the facility has been billing for services not actually provided, that's evidence of fraud. How long will all this take? Daniel asked, though Sophia could hear the underlying worry in his voice. How long before Evelyn came back with a court order? How long before they had to watch Sophia be dragged away? That depends on what we find, Crawford said honestly. Best case scenario, we uncover enough evidence of fraud to get an emergency hearing within a week or two. Worst case, I disappear into that facility and you never see me again. Sophia finished quietly. The room fell silent as the reality of their situation sank in. They were fighting against people with unlimited resources, 20 years of careful planning, and the full weight of the legal system behind them. "There's something else," Crawford said, his expression growing more serious. "In cases like this, when there's this much money at stake, the perpetrators tend to get desperate when they feel cornered. You need to be very careful, all of you." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, though Sophia could see he already suspected. "I mean that Evelyn Graves has spent 20 years building a very lucrative arrangement around your supposed incapacity, Ms. Laurent. If that arrangement is threatened, she might resort to extreme measures to protect it." "You think she'd hurt us?" Sophia felt cold dread pooling in her stomach. "I think you should assume she's capable of anything," Crawford said bluntly. "People have killed for a lot less than $20 billion. After Crawford left, promising to call within 24 hours with whatever information he could gather, Sophia found herself standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the mountains and trying to process everything that had happened. "Second thoughts?" Daniel asked softly, coming up behind her. "About what?" "About staying. About fighting. It would be easier to disappear, start over somewhere else with a new identity." Sophia turned in his arms, seeing the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "And leave Emma wondering what happened to the woman who promised she'd stay forever, never see you again. Let Evelyn win." "I just want you safe," Daniel said, cupping her face in his hands. "I want Emma safe. If something happened to either of you because of me, because of you." Sophia caught his hands, holding them against her cheeks. "Daniel, you saved my life. Not just from that storm, but from 20 years of believing I was crazy, believing I was worthless, believing I deserved what was happening to me. You never deserved any of that. I know that now. Because of you. Because of Emma. Because for the first time in 20 years, I remember what it feels like to be loved." Sophia pressed a soft kiss to his palm. "I'm not running, Daniel. I'm not hiding. I'm going to fight for this life we've built together, and I'm going to destroy everyone who tries to take it away from me." Daniel's smile was fierce and proud. "Then we fight together. Together." Sophia agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of hope and determination and the fierce love that had already survived one storm and was strong enough to weather whatever came next. But even as they held each other in the warm sanctuary of their kitchen, neither of them noticed the telephoto lens trained on them from the wooded hillside behind the house, or the man with the camera, who was already uploading photos to a secure server where Evelyn Graves waited to receive them. The battle for Sophia's freedom was just beginning, and Evelyn had no intention of fighting fair. That afternoon, as Emma played in the yard under Mrs. Whitmore's watchful eye, Sophia and Daniel received a call that changed everything. Crawford's voice was tight with excitement and barely controlled rage. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "I'm sending you a link to a video file. Watch it, then call me back immediately." The video was security footage from the Denver Children's Hospital gala time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. It showed Sophia, though she looked different, more subdued, moving with the careful precision of someone heavily medicated entering the building beside Evelyn Graves. "Look at the timestamp," Daniel said, pausing the video. "This was taken at 7:15 p.m. They watched as Evelyn guided Sophia through the crowd, introducing her to various donors and dignitaries. Sophia smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, but there was something hollow about her responses, something mechanical that made Daniel's jaw clench with fury. "She's drugged," he said flatly. "Look at her eyes. She's barely conscious." The video continued, showing Evelyn leading Sophia to a quiet corner where she handed her a glass of champagne. They watched Sophia drink it obediently, then saw her expression change as the additional medication took effect. The confusion, the fear, the desperate way she looked around, as if seeing the room clearly for the first time. "This is when I started to break free," Sophia whispered, watching her past self stumble away from Evelyn, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Something about the music, the noise it must have cut through the fog. The final frames showed Evelyn speaking urgently to security guards, pointing after Sophia's retreating figure. Even without sound, her body language clearly conveyed distress and concern for a mentally ill patient. "She orchestrated the whole thing," Daniel said, his voice shaking with rage. "She brought you there drugged, then, when the medication wore off enough for you to realize something was wrong, she used your panic as proof that you were mentally ill." Sophia's phone rang. Crawford's number. "Did you watch it?" he asked as soon as she answered. "Every second," Sophia said, her voice hollow. "How did you get this to?" "A contact at the hospital. The security chief remembered the incident and pulled the footage when I asked about it. There's more, Sophia, much more." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been digging into Willowbrook's financial records and the numbers don't add up. They've been billing your trust fund for round-the-clock psychiatric care for a private patient, you at a rate of approximately $4,000 per day." Sophia did the math quickly. "That's over $1 million a year. Every year for 20 years. But here's the interesting part, I can't find any evidence that you were actually receiving that level of care. In fact, I can't find much evidence that you were receiving any care at all." Daniel took the phone from Sophia's trembling hands. "What are you saying, Crawford?" "I'm saying that either Willowbrook has been defrauding the Laurent Trust for 20 years, or Sophia Laurent hasn't been a patient there for nearly as long as the records claim." The implications hit them both like a physical blow. If Sophia hadn't been at Willowbrook, where had she been? What had Evelyn done with her for all those years? "There's more," Crawford continued. "I've been tracking the ownership of Willowbrook, and it gets very interesting. The facility is owned by a shell company, which is owned by another shell company, which is ultimately owned by a trust based in the Cayman Islands." "Let me guess," Daniel said grimly. "A trust that Evelyn Graves has access to." "Bingo. She's been paying herself to keep you imprisoned, Sophia. She created an entire fake medical facility just to justify stealing your inheritance." Sophia sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Evelyn's deception. "How is that even possible? How did no one notice?" "Because she's very good at what she does, and because the oversight systems for guardianship cases are woefully inadequate, especially for wealthy families who prefer to handle things privately." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything they'd learned. "Crawford, if Willowbrook is fake, if the medical records are fabricated, then what happened to Sophia for 20 years? Where was she actually being held?" The silence on the other end of the line was ominous. "I don't know," Crawford admitted finally. "But I'm going to find out. In the meantime, you need to be very, very careful. If I'm right about this, if Evelyn has been running a 20-year con involving kidnapping, imprisonment, and massive financial fraud, then she's not going to let Sophia's escape destroy everything she's built." "What do you recommend?" Daniel asked. "Get somewhere safe. Get somewhere public. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone connected to the Laurent family or Evelyn Graves. Anyone." After Crawford hung up, Sophia and Daniel sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. 20 years of her life stolen not just by imprisonment, but by an elaborate fraud that had enriched her captors while the world believed she was receiving the best possible care. "I need to call my lawyers," Sophia said finally. "My real lawyers, the ones who handled my father's estate." "Are you sure they're still your lawyers?" Daniel asked gently. After 20 years after being declared incompetent. Sophia felt a chill of realization. Of course. Evelyn would have replaced anyone loyal to Sophia or her father years ago. Everyone she'd once trusted, everyone who might have questioned her guardianship, would have been systematically removed from positions of influence. She thought of everything, Sophia whispered. She's had 20 years to perfect this system. 20 years to remove anyone who might help me to create a perfect prison that no one would ever think to question. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook, with the overwhelming realization of how completely she'd been betrayed. Not just by Evelyn, but by everyone who was supposed to protect her lawyers. Doctors, social workers, judges. All of them had failed her, and some of them had been bought. "It's not over," Daniel said fiercely. "We have evidence now. We have proof that she's been defrauding your trust. That changes everything." "Does it?" Sophia pulled back to look at him. "She has 20 years of documentation saying I'm mentally ill. She has a facility with my name on the patient rolls. She has medical professionals who will swear I've been receiving treatment. What do we have? Security footage and financial irregularities that could be explained away. We have the truth. The truth doesn't always win, Daniel. Money wins, power wins, and Evelyn has both." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of a car in the driveway made them both freeze. But this time, it wasn't a black sedan. It was Mrs. Whitmore's old Buick, and she was driving faster than Sophia had ever seen her drive. The older woman burst through the front door without knocking, her face pale with urgency. "Emma's school called," she said without preamble. "Someone tried to pick her up an hour ago. A woman claiming to be her aunt with official-looking papers saying there was a family emergency." Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Where is she? Is she safe?" "She's safe. The school principal knew Emma doesn't have any aunts and called me when they couldn't reach you. But Daniel, whoever this woman was, she knew details about Emma's life. Her teacher's name, her best friend, what she had for lunch yesterday. This wasn't random." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. "They're using Emma to get to me." "We need to get her," Daniel said, already reaching for his keys. "We need to get her and go somewhere safe." "Where?" Mrs. Whitmore asked. "Daniel, these people have resources you can't imagine. They've been planning this for 20 years. There's nowhere you can run that they can't find you." "Then what do you suggest?" Daniel's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "We make it public," Sophia said suddenly. "Crawford said he needed evidence. Well, now we have it. Attempted kidnapping of a child, security footage showing me being drugged, financial records proving fraud. We take all of it to the media, to the FBI, to anyone who will listen." "That's a hell of a risk," Mrs. Whitmore said. "If you're wrong, if they manage to spin this as the delusions of a mentally ill woman, then I go back to prison and Emma grows up without a father, because they'll destroy Daniel too." Sophia met both their eyes steadily. "But if we do nothing, Emma's in danger anyway. At least this way, we're fighting back." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia could see him weighing their impossible options. Finally, he nodded. "We fight," he said simply. "But first we get Emma." As they drove toward the school, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The words on the screen made her blood run cold. "You have 24 hours to surrender yourself voluntarily, or the little girl pays the price for your selfishness. Some things are more important than your delusions of freedom." Daniel read the message over her shoulder, and his hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. "They just made a mistake," he said quietly, and something in his voice made Sophia look at him sharply. "They just threatened my daughter." The man beside her was no longer the gentle, patient Daniel she'd fallen in love with. This was the soldier who'd served 20 years in the army, who'd faced down enemies and protected the innocent. This was a man who would do absolutely anything to protect his child. "What are you thinking?" Sophia asked. "I'm thinking that Evelyn Graves has no idea who she's dealing with," Daniel said, his voice deadly calm. "She thinks she's playing with civilians, with people who will be intimidated by threats and official-looking documents. And she's wrong." Daniel's smile was sharp as a blade. "She's very, very wrong. She wants to play hardball fine. But she's about to learn that there are some lines you don't cross. And threatening my daughter just became the biggest mistake of her very long life." As they pulled into the school parking lot, Sophia felt something shift inside her. The frightened, confused woman who'd been found on that rainy highway was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd been forged in the fires of 20 years of stolen life and was ready to fight for everything she'd found worth fighting for. The war for her freedom was about to begin in earnest, and this time she wasn't fighting alone. Emma was waiting at the principal's office, her small face pressed against the window as she watched for Daniel's truck. The moment she saw him, she bolted from her chair and ran straight into his arms, her whole body trembling with relief. "Daddy." "There was a scary lady who said she was my aunt, but I don't have any aunts, and she knew things about me that strangers shouldn't know, and Principal Martinez wouldn't let me go with her, and I was so scared." "Shh, baby girl," Daniel soothed, holding her tight. "You're safe now. You did exactly the right thing." Principal Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, approached with a folder of papers. "Mr. Hayes, I'm glad you're here." The woman who came for Emma had very convincing documentation, a court order claiming emergency custody due to an unstable home environment. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. Sophia felt sick. Even in their desperation, Evelyn's people had been thorough, professional, legitimate-looking. If Principal Martinez hadn't been cautious enough to call Mrs. Whitmore first. "Can you describe this woman?" Daniel asked, though they all suspected they knew who it had been. Mid-40s, expensively dressed, very authoritative manner. She seemed surprised when I insisted on verifying the paperwork before releasing Emma. Said something about people not understanding the urgency of protecting children from dangerous situations. "Did she leave her name?" "Margaret Blackwood," according to her identification. Said she was a social worker from the state office. Principal Martinez's expression grew troubled. "Mr. Hayes, I've worked with state social services for 15 years. I know most of the workers in this region, and I've never heard of anyone by that name." Emma pulled back from Daniel's embrace to look at Sophia, her young face serious beyond her years. "The lady asked lots of questions about you. About whether you lived with us, whether you seemed sick or angry, whether you'd ever hurt me. I told her you were the nicest person in the whole world, and that you helped me with my homework and made really good pancakes." Sophia knelt down to Emma's level, her heart breaking at the fear still visible in the little girl's eyes. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Are they going to try to take you away?" Emma's voice was small, vulnerable. "They might try," Sophia said honestly. "But we're not going to let them succeed." As they walked to the truck, Daniel's phone rang. Crawford's number. "I just heard about the attempted pickup at the school," the journalist said without preamble. "My contact at the sheriff's office called me. This changes everything, Sophia." "How?" "Because attempted kidnapping of a minor is a federal crime when it involves crossing state lines. And I have some very interesting information about the woman who tried to take Emma." Daniel put the call on speaker as they climbed into the truck. "What kind of information?" The kind that proves Evelyn Graves is even more desperate than we thought. The woman who went to the school, she's not a social worker. She's a private security contractor with a very interesting resume. Former military, specializes in extractions and relocations. She's worked for some very wealthy clients who needed problems to disappear quietly. Sophia felt cold dread pooling in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that if they'd succeeded in taking Emma, you would have done anything to get her back, including voluntarily returning to Evelyn's custody. It was never about the child, it was about leverage over you. Emma looked confused, so Daniel quickly explained in age-appropriate terms that some bad people were trying to cause trouble, but that everyone was safe and they had a plan to stop it. Crawford, Daniel said once Emma was distracted with her tablet, what's our next move? We go public. Tonight. I've got enough evidence to run a front-page story tomorrow morning, and I've already contacted my colleague at 60 Minutes. They want to do a full investigation piece, but they need Sophia to go on record. Sophia's heart raced. Going public meant no more hiding, no more pretending to be just Clara Hayes living a quiet life in small-town Colorado. It meant exposure scrutiny, and almost certainly retaliation from Evelyn. If I do this, she said carefully, if I tell my story publicly, there's no going back. Evelyn will come at us with everything she has. She's already coming at you with everything she has, Crawford pointed out. At least this way you're controlling the narrative instead of reacting to hers. Daniel reached over and took Sophia's hand. It's your choice. Whatever you decide, we'll face the consequences together. Sophia looked back at Emma, who was humming softly while playing a game on her tablet, blissfully unaware that her entire world hung in the balance. This innocent child who'd accepted Sophia into her life with such open trust deserved better than to be used as a pawn in Evelyn's twisted games. Do it, Sophia said firmly. Set up the interview. That evening, while Emma played at Mrs. Whitmore's house, Sophia and Daniel met Crawford at a secure location, a small conference room at the Denver Post that had been swept for surveillance devices. Also present was FBI Special Agent Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who specialized in financial crimes. Ms. Laurent, Agent Santos said, before we begin, I need to inform you that everything you say tonight could be used in a potential federal prosecution. You have the right to have an attorney present. The attorneys I had 20 years ago were either bought off or replaced, Sophia said. Right now, the only people I trust are in this room. Santos nodded and activated a digital recorder. Please state your full name for the record. My name is Sophia Marie Laurent. I am the daughter of Charles Laurent, founder of Laurent Industries, and the sole beneficiary of the Laurent Family Trust. Sophia's voice was steady, strong. 20 years ago, I was kidnapped and held prisoner by my legal guardian, Evelyn Graves, who has been stealing my inheritance and using my forced disappearance to commit fraud on a massive scale. For the next 3 hours, Sophia told her story. Everything she could remember about the night she was drugged, the years of forced medication, the fake psychiatric facility, the way Evelyn had systematically isolated her from anyone who might help. Crawford recorded every word while Agent Santos took detailed notes. You said earlier that you believe Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital is essentially a front operation, Santos said. Can you elaborate on that? I was supposedly a patient there for 20 years, receiving round-the-clock care at a cost of over $1 million annually. But I have no memory of being there for more than brief periods. I remember being moved frequently, always heavily sedated, always isolated from other patients or staff. Where do you think you were actually being held? Sophia closed her eyes, trying to summon memories that had been chemically suppressed for 2 decades. Private facilities, sometimes what felt like expensive homes or estates. Always remote, always with minimal staff who spoke very little English. I remember waking up in different places, different climates. Once I could hear ocean waves, another time mountain winds. Evelyn was moving you around. Daniel said, his jaw tight with anger. Keeping you drugged and displaced so you could never get oriented, never figure out where you were or how to escape. Agent Santos made another note. Mr. Crawford has provided us with financial records showing large payments from the Laurent Trust to various shell companies. If we can prove these companies were used to fund your illegal imprisonment rather than legitimate medical care, we have grounds for federal charges, including kidnapping, fraud, and racketeering. How long will that take? Daniel asked. Investigations like this can take months or even years, Santos admitted. But the attempted abduction of your daughter changes things. That gives us grounds for immediate action while we build the larger case. Crawford leaned forward. Agent Santos, what kind of protection can you offer them? Evelyn Graves has virtually unlimited resources and has already demonstrated she's willing to threaten children. We can provide temporary protective custody, but that would mean relocating the family until the immediate threat is neutralized. Sophia felt her heart sink. They'd just found their home, their place in the world, and now they might have to abandon it all over again. There might be another option, Santos continued. Miss Laurent, would you be willing to wear a wire if we could get Evelyn Graves to admit to any part of this conspiracy on tape? It would significantly strengthen our case. Absolutely not, Daniel said before Sophia could respond. It's too dangerous. It is dangerous, Santos agreed. But it might be the fastest way to end this. Right now, it's Sophia's word against 20 years of fabricated documentation. We need Evelyn to incriminate herself. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The idea of facing Evelyn again, of voluntarily putting herself within reach of the woman who'd stolen her entire adult life, was terrifying. But the alternative was running forever, always looking over their shoulders, never knowing when Evelyn might strike again. What would I have to do? She asked. We'd arrange a meeting. You'd tell Evelyn you're willing to return voluntarily in exchange for guarantees about Daniel and Emma's safety. We'd wire you with audio and video recording devices, and agents would be standing by to intervene if things went wrong. When you say, if things went wrong, Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. What exactly are we talking about? Santos met his eyes steadily. There's always a risk in operations like this. Evelyn Graves has already shown she's willing to commit serious crimes to maintain her control over Sophia's assets. If she feels cornered, if she thinks Sophia is trying to trap her, she might decide it's easier to eliminate the problem permanently, Crawford finished grimly. The room fell silent as they all contemplated the stakes involved. Outside Denver, traffic hummed past the newspaper building. Ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that in this small conference room, decisions were being made that could expose one of the largest guardianship fraud cases in American history. I'll do it, Sophia said finally. Sophia, no. Daniel's voice was raw with fear and desperation. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Daniel. You heard Agent Santos. A traditional investigation could take years. How long do you think Emma can live like this, always afraid, always looking over her shoulder? She deserves better. She deserves to have you alive, Daniel shot back. Sophia turned to face him, fully taking his hands in hers. And she deserves to grow up free from the shadow of Evelyn Graves. This woman has controlled my life for 20 years, Daniel. I won't let her control yours or Emma's for one day longer than necessary. Agent Santos cleared her throat. If we do this, it would have to be tomorrow. The longer we wait, the more time Evelyn has to plan her next move. And based on today's attempted abduction, her next move might be more direct. Crawford nodded. I can have the story ready to run as soon as you have Evelyn on tape. The combination of her recorded confession and Sophia's public testimony will make it impossible for her to maintain the fiction of guardianship. And if the wire fails, if something goes wrong with the recording, Daniel asked, then we hope that exposing the truth publicly is enough to protect you, Santos said honestly. Media attention has a way of making it very difficult for people to disappear quietly. Over the next hour, they worked out the details. Agent Santos would contact Evelyn through official FBI channels, claiming they were investigating the attempted abduction at Emma's school and needed to interview all parties involved. During that contact, they would mention that Sophia was cooperating with the investigation, but was willing to meet privately to discuss a resolution. Evelyn will see it as an opportunity, Crawford said. A chance to convince Sophia to recant her story, to come back voluntarily before the FBI digs too deep. And when she does, Sophia said, I'll be ready for her. As they prepared to leave, Agent Santos pulled Sophia aside. Ms. Laurent, I need you to understand the magnitude of what we're asking you to do. Evelyn Graves isn't just a criminal. She's a criminal who's been operating successfully for 20 years without being caught. She's intelligent, ruthless, and desperate. If she even suspects you're recording her, I understand the risks, Sophia said. But Agent Santos, you need to understand something too. I've been Evelyn's prisoner for half my life. I've been drugged, isolated, told I was crazy, stripped of my identity and my freedom. There is nothing she can do to me now that's worse than what she's already done. And if she threatens Daniel or Emma, Sophia's expression hardened, then she'll discover that 20 years of captivity has taught me things about survival that she can't possibly imagine. I won't be her victim anymore. The drive back to Fairplay was conducted in heavy silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. It wasn't until they were almost home that Daniel finally spoke. I can't lose you, he said quietly. Not now. Not when we've just found each other. Sophia reached over and placed her hand over his on the steering wheel. You're not going to lose me, Daniel. We've come too far to let Evelyn win now. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if things go wrong tomorrow, if Evelyn tries to hurt you, you'll fight back. No more being the victim. No more letting her control the situation. Sophia was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman she'd been when Daniel found her on that highway, broken, confused, completely passive. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, who'd remembered what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. I promise, she said. But Daniel, you need to promise me something too. What's that? Promise me that whatever happens tomorrow, you'll take care of Emma. That you'll help her understand why I had to do this, why some fights are worth the risk. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Don't talk like that. We're both going to be here to take care of Emma. We're both going to watch her grow up and graduate and get married and have babies of her own. I hope so, Sophia said softly. I want that more than I've ever wanted anything. But if something goes wrong, nothing's going to go wrong, Daniel said fiercely. I won't let it. They pulled into their driveway to find Mrs. Whitmore waiting on the porch with Emma, who came running as soon as she saw the truck. Did you catch the bad guys? Emma asked, launching herself into Sophia's arms. Not yet, sweetheart, Sophia said, holding the little girl tight. But we're working on it. Are you still going to be here when I wake up tomorrow? The innocent question hit Sophia like a physical blow. Tomorrow she would be meeting with Evelyn, walking voluntarily into the presence of the woman who'd destroyed her life. There were no guarantees about how that meeting would end. "I'm going to try my very best to be here," Sophia said, which was the most honest answer she could give. Emma studied Sophia's face with the uncanny perceptiveness that seemed to be her superpower. "You're scared." "A little bit, yes." "It's okay to be scared," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. This remarkable child, this beautiful little girl who'd accepted her so completely, was teaching her about courage. "Your daddy is a very wise man," Sophia said. "I know," Emma said with 8-year-old confidence. "That's why I'm not worried about tomorrow. Daddy and I were really good at taking care of the people we love." That night, after Emma was asleep, and Mrs. Whitmore had gone home with promises to return early in the morning, Sophia and Daniel sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the Colorado mountains. The night was crisp and clear, the kind of evening that made the entire world seem peaceful and manageable. "Hard to believe that somewhere out there Evelyn is planning her next move," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She's probably in some expensive hotel room making calls to lawyers and private security firms trying to figure out how to contain the damage." Sophia pulled Daniel's jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I keep wondering what she'll say when she sees me tomorrow. Whether she'll try to convince me that I really am mentally ill, that these past few days have all been another episode." "You're not mentally ill, Sophia. You never were. I know that now. But for years, she had me so convinced that I was crazy, that I stopped trusting my own perceptions, my own memories. Even now, sometimes I catch myself wondering if I'm remembering things correctly, if the truth is as clear-cut as I think it is." Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Look at me," he said softly. Sophia met his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there. "You are the strongest, sanest, most beautiful person I've ever known," Daniel said. "You survived 20 years of psychological torture and came out the other side with your compassion and your capacity for love intact. You're not a victim, Sophia. You're a survivor. And tomorrow you're going to prove that to the whole world." Sophia felt something ease in her chest, a knot of fear and uncertainty that had been there so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't a natural part of her. "I love you, Daniel Hayes." "I love you too, Sophia Laurent." "Clara Hayes." "Whoever you choose to be from this moment forward." They made love that night with a desperate tenderness, as if they could somehow store up enough love and connection to last through whatever tomorrow might bring. Sophia memorized every touch, every whispered endearment, every moment of perfect intimacy, holding them close against her heart, like talismans against the darkness. Afterward, as Daniel slept beside her, Sophia lay awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a ghost, a non-person existing in a chemical haze at the mercy of people who saw her only as a means to an end. Now she was a woman, with a family, with love, with something precious enough to fight for. Tomorrow she would face the woman who'd stolen her life. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man she loved in the home they'd built together, surrounded by the kind of ordinary, extraordinary happiness that was worth any risk to protect. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and overcast with low clouds hanging over the mountains like a shroud. Sophia woke before her alarm, her body tense with anticipation and fear. Beside her, Daniel was already awake, watching her with worried eyes. "Second thoughts?" he asked softly. third and fourth thoughts, Sophia admitted. But I'm still going to do it. Agent Santos arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying a briefcase full of sophisticated recording equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. The transmitter was smaller than Sophia had expected, a tiny device that would be hidden beneath her clothes, with a backup recorder sewn into the lining of her jacket. The signal has a range of about half a mile, Santos explained, as she helped Sophia with the equipment. We'll have agents positioned at multiple points around the meeting location, and I'll be in a surveillance van with direct audio contact. What if she searches me? Sophia asked. The primary transmitter will show up if she uses professional-grade detection equipment, but the backup recorder is virtually undetectable. Even if she finds the first one, we'll still have audio. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep. Are you going to catch the bad lady today? That's the plan, sweetheart, Sophia said, kneeling down to Emma's level. And after today, she won't be able to bother us anymore. Emma studied Sophia's face with that serious expression that made her seem much older than 8. You're coming back, right? You're not going to disappear like people do in movies. Sophia felt her throat tighten. I'm going to do everything I can to come back, Emma. But if something happens if I can't come back, I need you to know how much I love you, how much these past few weeks have meant to me. Nothing's going to happen, Emma said with fierce certainty, because Daddy won't let it, and neither will I. Before Sophia could ask what she meant, Emma had darted back to her room, returning with something clutched in her small hand. Here, she said, pressing a small object into Sophia's palm. This is my lucky horse. His name is Thunder, and he's really brave. You should take him with you. Sophia looked down at the tiny plastic horse, its paint worn smooth from countless hours of play. It was Emma's most treasured possession, and she was offering it as protection against the unknown. Emma, I can't take Thunder. He's yours. He wants to help, Emma said simply, and he'll make sure you come home safe. Sophia carefully tucked the little horse into her pocket next to the recording devices that would either save them all or get her killed. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take very good care of him. The meeting was set for noon at a neutral location, a small cafe in downtown Denver that Agent Santos had chosen specifically because it offered multiple exit routes and clear lines of sight for surveillance. Sophia arrived first, choosing a table near the window where the FBI cameras could capture everything. Evelyn was exactly on time, gliding into the cafe with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her ability to control any situation. She looked perfectly composed, expensively dressed, every inch the successful businesswoman. Only someone who knew her as well as Sophia did would notice the tension around her eyes, the barely perceptible tightness in her smile. Sophia, darling, Evelyn said, settling into the chair across from her with practiced grace. You look well, better than I expected considering your recent episode. Hello, Evelyn. Sophia kept her voice level, professional. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Of course, dear. When the FBI told me you were ready to discuss returning home, I was so relieved. This whole situation has been very stressful for everyone involved. Sophia waited while Evelyn ordered coffee, using the time to study the woman who'd controlled her life for so long. Up close, she could see the subtle signs of strain, the perfectly applied makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, the way her manicured fingers drummed silently against the table. The FBI, Sophia said carefully, seemed very interested in my condition. They asked a lot of questions about Willowbrook, about my treatment history. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes, calculation maybe, or concern. I'm sure they're just being thorough. Government agencies do love their paperwork. They also asked about the trust fund, about the financial arrangements for my care. Evelyn's smile never wavered, but Sophia caught the slight stiffening of her posture. Sophia, you know I've always managed your affairs with your best interests at heart. Your father entrusted me with your care, and I've honored that trust completely. Have you? Sophia leaned forward slightly, making sure the hidden cameras could capture Evelyn's face clearly. Because according to the records they showed me, I've been receiving very expensive care at Willowbrook for 20 years. Round-the-clock psychiatric supervision, private rooms, specialized treatment. But Evelyn, I don't remember most of that care. Of course you don't, dear. That's the nature of your condition. The medication necessary to keep you stable affects your memory formation. Dr. Morrison explained all of this to you many times. Dr. Morrison, Sophia repeated. Remind me, when was the last time I actually saw Dr. Morrison? For just a moment, Evelyn hesitated. It was barely perceptible, but Sophia caught it, the brief pause, as Evelyn calculated how much Sophia might actually remember. Last month, of course, right before your wandering episode. He was very concerned about your increasing agitation, your resistance to medication. That's why we had to increase your dosage. Increase my dosage of what exactly? Sophia, we've been through this so many times. The antipsychotics, the mood stabilizers, the cocktail that keeps you functional and prevents the violent episodes. Sophia felt a chill at how easily the lies rolled off Evelyn's tongue. 20 years of practice had made her an expert at gaslighting, at making fiction sound like established fact. The violent episodes, Sophia said. Tell me about those. Because I'm having trouble remembering any instances where I hurt anyone. Evelyn's eyes hardened slightly, though her smile remained in place. Sophia, we both know that your memory isn't reliable. That's why you need proper supervision, proper care. That's why this little adventure of yours is so dangerous, not just for you, but for innocent people like Mr. Hayes and his daughter. There it was, the threat delivered with such casual elegance that it almost sounded like concern. Are you threatening them? Sophia asked directly. Of course not, dear. I'm simply pointing out that your condition makes you unpredictable. The Hayes family has no idea what they're dealing with. Yesterday's incident at the school was just a misunderstanding, but next time... Next time what, Evelyn? Evelyn leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that the recording devices would just barely pick up. Next time you might hurt that little girl, Sophia. You might hurt her badly, and then you'll have to live with that guilt for the rest of your life. Is that what you want? Sophia felt rage building in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly what Agent Santos had warned her about: Evelyn's ability to twist reality, to make her victims doubt their own perceptions. I would never hurt Emma, Sophia said firmly. You said the same thing about the nurse at Willowbrook, Evelyn replied smoothly. Right before you nearly killed her. What nurse? When did this supposedly happen? 3 years ago. You attacked her with a scalpel during a routine medication check. She nearly died, Sophia. If the orderlies hadn't gotten there in time... Sophia stared at Evelyn, recognizing the lie for what it was, but understanding how convincing it would sound to anyone who didn't know the truth. You're making this up. Am I? Would you like me to provide the hospital records? The police report, the testimony of the staff members who witnessed it. Of course, Evelyn could provide all of those things. 20 years had given her plenty of time to create whatever documentation she needed to support her version of events. Why? Sophia asked quietly. Why did you do this to me? Was it just about the money? Evelyn's mask slipped slightly, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. Your father was a brilliant man, Sophia, but he was naive about business. He thought sentiment and charity were more important than profit. He was going to destroy everything he'd built with his bleeding heart philanthropy. So you decided to destroy me instead. I decided to protect the company and the thousands of jobs that depended on it. Your little trust fund was going to pour billions into feel-good projects that would have bankrupted Laurent Industries within a decade. That was my choice to make. No, Evelyn said, her voice sharp with authority. It was my responsibility to prevent. Your father trusted me to look after his legacy, and that's exactly what I've done. Sophia felt a surge of triumph. Evelyn was admitting that she'd taken control of the trust fund to prevent Sophia from using it as she chose. It wasn't a complete admission of kidnapping and fraud, but it was enough to establish motive. And if I refuse to go back with you, Sophia asked, if I decide to reclaim control of my inheritance? Evelyn's smile was cold as winter. Then we'll have to take more direct action to protect everyone involved, starting with ensuring that Mr. Hayes loses custody of his daughter due to his association with a dangerous mental patient. You can't do that. Can't I? I have 20 years of medical records documenting your violent tendencies, your unpredictable behavior. Combined with evidence of Mr. Hayes's PTSD and his recent unemployment, any judge would agree that Emma needs to be placed in a more stable environment. Sophia felt the walls closing in. Even if the FBI had enough evidence to arrest Evelyn, the damage would already be done. Emma would be traumatized by being torn away from her father, Daniel would be destroyed by losing his daughter, and Sophia would still be fighting an uphill battle against 20 years of fabricated evidence. What do you want? Sophia asked finally. I want you to come home, Sophia. Voluntarily, publicly. I want you to hold a press conference explaining that you've been suffering from a mental health crisis, that you wandered away from your treatment facility during a psychotic episode, and that you're grateful to return to the excellent care you've been receiving. And in exchange, Mr. Hayes keeps his daughter, your newfound friends remain safe, and you receive the best possible care for your condition. Everyone wins. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, appearing to consider Evelyn's offer. In reality, she was buying time, hoping Evelyn would say something more incriminating, something that would definitively prove the conspiracy. The Willowbrook facility, Sophia said finally. I'd like to see it. Before I agree to anything, I want to tour the place where I'll supposedly be spending the rest of my life. Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. That's not necessary, dear. You've seen it many times before. Have I? Because my memories of the place are very fragmented, almost like I was never actually there for extended periods. Your medication. My medication, my episodes, my violent tendencies, Sophia interrupted. You keep coming back to these things, but you know what I find interesting. Evelyn, for someone who's supposedly been my guardian for 20 years, you don't seem to know very much about my actual day-to-day life. What do you mean? I mean that if I've really been a patient at Willowbrook all this time, you should be able to tell me about my routine there. My favorite foods, my interactions with other patients, the books I like to read. But you can't, can you? Because I was never really there. Evelyn's eyes went cold and dangerous. Sophia, you're having another episode. You need to come with me right now before you say something you'll regret. Where was I, Evelyn? Sophia pressed. For 20 years, where was I really being held? You're being irrational. Was it that compound in Switzerland, the one near the private banks where you've been hiding my money, or maybe the estate in the Cayman Islands that's registered to one of your shell companies? Evelyn went very still, her face paling beneath her perfect makeup. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Because I'm starting to remember more every day. Private jets, isolated compounds, armed guards who spoke Russian or German. Not exactly standard psychiatric care, is it? Sophia, stop this nonsense right now. Make me, Sophia said quietly. Call your security team, have them drag me out of here kicking and screaming. Let's see how that plays in tomorrow's headlines. For the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn looked genuinely rattled. She glanced around the cafe, probably noticing for the first time how many people were within earshot, how many phones might be recording their conversation. You think you're very clever, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you have no idea what you're dealing with. I have spent 20 years building this arrangement, creating a perfect system. I am not going to let some confused girl with delusions of grandeur destroy everything I've worked for. So what are you going to do about it? Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes boring into Sophia's. I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect my interests. And if that means permanently removing obstacles to my plans, then that's exactly what I'll do. Sophia felt her blood turn to ice. There it was, as close to a direct threat as Evelyn was likely to make in a public place. Are you threatening to kill me, Evelyn? I'm stating a fact, Sophia. Accidents happen, especially to mentally unstable people who refuse to take their medication. Heart failure, brought on by medication non-compliance, is sadly common in patients with your supposed condition. My supposed condition? Evelyn realized her slip immediately, but it was too late. The admission that Sophia's mental illness was fabricated was now on tape recorded by devices that would soon be in the hands of federal prosecutors. You're going to regret this conversation, Evelyn said, standing abruptly. All of you are going to regret interfering with things you don't understand. Evelyn, Sophia called as the older woman prepared to leave. Just so you know, this entire conversation has been recorded. Audio and video. The FBI has been listening to every word. Evelyn's face went white with rage and something that might have been panic. For a moment, Sophia thought she might actually attack her right there in the crowded cafe. You stupid, ungrateful little bitch, Evelyn hissed. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, Sophia said calmly. I've ended your 20-year crime spree. Evelyn turned and stalked out of the cafe, her composure finally completely shattered. Through the window, Sophia could see her making urgent phone calls as she walked, probably trying to coordinate damage control or activate whatever contingency plans she had in place. Agent Santos's voice crackled through Sophia's nearly invisible earpiece. Outstanding work. We got everything we needed and more. Teams are moving to arrest her now. But even as Sophia felt a surge of relief and triumph, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Evelyn Graves had spent 20 years planning for every contingency, and she'd just been backed into a corner by someone she'd underestimated completely. As Sophia left the cafe and headed toward the FBI surveillance van, she found herself thinking about Emma's lucky horse still tucked safely in her pocket. Maybe there really was something to be said for the faith of children, for believing that good things were possible even in the darkest of circumstances. She was going home to Daniel and Emma, and this time she was bringing the promise of freedom with her. But Evelyn Graves had not built a $20 billion criminal empire by accepting defeat gracefully. As FBI agents moved to intercept her outside the cafe, she was already 3 steps ahead, disappearing into the maze of downtown Denver's business district, with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades planning for this exact scenario. Agent Santos's voice crackled through Sophia's earpiece with barely controlled frustration. Target is in the wind. Repeat, target has evaded arrest. All units be advised that Evelyn Graves is now considered armed and extremely dangerous. Sophia felt her blood turn to ice. What do you mean she's gone? She had a team waiting, Santos said grimly, as she approached Sophia on the sidewalk. Professional extraction, multiple vehicles, sophisticated counter-surveillance. This was planned down to the minute. But you have her confession on tape. You have evidence of fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, all of which is useless if we can't find her to arrest her. Santos was already coordinating with other agents through her radio. Right now, our priority is keeping you and your family safe. Evelyn knows she's been exposed, which makes her desperate. And desperate people with unlimited resources are the most dangerous kind. The drive back to Fairplay felt like the longest of Sophia's life. Every black sedan, every helicopter overhead, every unexpected sound made her heart race with the possibility that Evelyn's people had found them. Agent Santos had insisted on a full escort, unmarked cars ahead and behind, with armed agents who took nothing for granted. "She's probably already out of the country," Santos said, trying to sound reassuring. "People like Evelyn always have exit strategies, private jets, false identities, offshore accounts. She's cutting her losses and running." But Sophia wasn't convinced. The woman she'd faced in that cafe hadn't looked defeated. She'd looked furious, calculating, and absolutely determined to maintain control. Evelyn had spent 20 years building her perfect system of control and exploitation. She wouldn't abandon it without a fight. When they pulled into Daniel's driveway, Sophia could see him watching from the front window, Emma pressed against his side. The moment the car stopped, they both came running. Emma launching herself into Sophia's arms with such force that she nearly knocked her over. "You came back," Emma cried, clinging to Sophia with fierce 8-year-old intensity. "Thunder kept you safe, didn't he?" Sophia pulled the little plastic horse from her pocket, holding it up for Emma to see. "He was very brave, just like you said he would be." Daniel's arms came around both of them, holding his family close, as if he could single-handedly protect them from whatever was coming. "How did it go? Did you get what you needed?" "We got everything," Sophia said, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. "Evelyn confessed to taking control of my trust fund, to fabricating my mental illness, even to planning to eliminate anyone who threatened her operation." "But," Daniel asked, reading her expression. "But she escaped before they could arrest her. She's still out there, Daniel, and she knows we can destroy her." Agent Santos approached them, her expression grim. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be stationing agents around your property and at Emma's school. Until we locate Evelyn Graves, we have to assume she poses a direct threat to your family." "For how long?" Daniel asked. "However long it takes. We've issued international arrest warrants, frozen every asset we can identify, and put every law enforcement agency in the world on alert. She can run, but she can't hide forever." Mrs. Whitmore appeared from inside the house, her silver hair perfectly arranged, despite the chaos of the day. "Well," she said with characteristic directness, "I suppose we'd better prepare for a siege." That evening, as FBI agents took up positions around the property, and Emma played with her horses under the watchful eye of armed federal marshals, Sophia found herself standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the Colorado mountains, and wondering if this was how the rest of their lives would be, always looking over their shoulders, always waiting for Evelyn's next move. "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I keep thinking about what she said. About protecting her interests, about removing obstacles permanently. What if bringing her into the open just made her more dangerous? Then we deal with whatever comes next," Daniel said firmly. "Together." But what kind of life is this for Emma? Armed guards, constant fear, never knowing when. Sophia. Daniel turned her in his arms, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me. We are not going to let that woman destroy what we've built. She's had 20 years to perfect her system of control, but she made one crucial mistake." "What's that?" She underestimated what people will do to protect the ones they love. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her small face serious beyond her years. "Are the bad guys really gone?" she asked. Sophia knelt down to Emma's level, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we're working very hard to make sure they can never hurt anyone again." "Will the police catch them?" "We hope so. But even if it takes a while, you're safe here with your daddy and me, and all these nice agents who are protecting us." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Mrs. Whitmore is making her famous chocolate chip cookies. She says when people are scared, cookies make everything better." Despite everything, Sophia found herself smiling. "Mrs. Whitmore is a very wise woman." "I know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She's old enough to know everything." For 3 days, life settled into an uneasy routine. FBI agents maintained their perimeter. Emma went to school under heavy protection, and Daniel tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while federal investigators worked around the clock to track down Evelyn and her network. Crawford called multiple times each day with updates from his own investigation. The story had exploded across national media. Billionaire heiress rescued after 20 years of captivity was dominating headlines, and public outrage was mounting as more details emerged about the scope of Evelyn's crimes. "The financial evidence alone is staggering," Crawford told them during one of his visits. "We're talking about the largest guardianship fraud case in American history. Evelyn didn't just steal from you, Sophia. She created an entire industry of fake medical facilities, shell companies, and corrupt officials. This thing goes deep." "How deep?" Agent Santos asked. She'd become a semi-permanent fixture at the house, coordinating the massive federal investigation from Daniel's kitchen table. "Deep enough that we've identified at least 6 other wealthy individuals who've been subjected to similar schemes. People who were declared mentally incompetent under suspicious circumstances, had their assets transferred to guardians, and then disappeared from public view." Sophia felt sick. "You mean there are others like me, other people Evelyn has imprisoned?" "We think so. And we think some of them might still be alive, still being held in various facilities around the world." The scope of Evelyn's crimes was so vast, so systematic, that it defied comprehension. But what haunted Sophia most was the knowledge that while she'd escaped, others were still trapped in the nightmare she'd only recently left behind. On the 4th day, everything changed. Sophia was helping Emma with her homework when Agent Santos burst through the front door, her face grim with urgency. "We need to move you. Now." "What's happened?" Daniel demanded instantly on high alert. "We intercepted communications indicating that Evelyn's people are planning a direct assault on this location tonight. They're not trying to kidnap Sophia anymore, they're trying to eliminate all witnesses." The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Agents swarmed through the house gathering essential items while Daniel threw clothes into bags and tried to explain to a confused and frightened Emma why they had to leave immediately. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked as they were hustled toward an armored vehicle. "Safe house in Denver," Santos replied tersely. "Maximum security, 24-hour protection." "What about Mrs. Whitmore?" "Already secured. She's being relocated to a separate facility for her protection." As they drove away from the only home Sophia had known since her escape, she watched Daniel's house disappear in the rearview mirror and felt something breaking inside her chest. They'd found peace there, built a life there. Now they were refugees again, running from shadows that might never stop chasing them. The safe house was a nondescript suburban ranch in an affluent Denver neighborhood, surrounded by enough FBI agents to stage a small war. Inside it had the sterile, temporary feel of a place designed for hiding rather than living. Emma, who'd been remarkably brave throughout the move, finally broke down once they were inside. "I want to go home," she sobbed, clinging to her father. "I want my room and my horses and my own bed." Daniel held her close, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know, baby girl, I know. This is just temporary. We'll go home soon." But would they? Sophia wondered if any of them would ever truly be safe as long as Evelyn was free, as long as $20 billion hung in the balance, as long as there were powerful people whose freedom depended on keeping the truth buried. That night, as Emma finally fell asleep between them, in the safe house's master bedroom, Sophia and Daniel lay awake listening to the sounds of federal agents maintaining their perimeter. "I'm sorry," Sophia whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For bringing this into your life. For putting Emma in danger. For destroying the peace you'd built after Sarah died." Daniel was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night when I found you on the highway? I was barely conscious. I don't remember saying anything coherent. You said, 'Thank you for stopping.' Not for helping, not for saving you. For stopping. Like you'd been hoping someone would finally see you, finally notice that you needed help." Sophia felt tears gathering in her eyes. "That's what love is, Sophia. It's stopping for someone when the rest of the world would just drive by. It's seeing someone who needs help and choosing to get involved even when it's complicated and dangerous and inconvenient. Even when it might get your daughter killed. Especially then. Because Emma needs to learn that there are things worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. She needs to know that when someone you love is in trouble, you don't walk away." On the 5th morning in the safe house, Agent Santos woke them with news that changed everything. "We found her." Sophia sat up instantly, her heart racing. "Where?" "Zurich, trying to access one of her offshore accounts. Swiss authorities have her in custody, and we're working on extradition." "Is it over?" Daniel asked, but Sophia could hear the caution in his voice. After everything they'd been through, none of them were ready to believe it could be that simple. "Not yet," Santos admitted. "Evelyn's lawyers are claiming diplomatic immunity. Apparently, she's been operating under multiple identities, including one with a diplomatic passport from a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. So she might get away with it. She might. But here's the thing, we also located 3 of the other victims Crawford identified. They're alive, Sophia. They're traumatized and going to need extensive rehabilitation, but they're alive. And they're talking." Sophia felt a surge of hope mixed with horror. Other people had survived Evelyn's system of imprisonment and exploitation. People who could corroborate her story, who could provide evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. "What about my trust fund, the money she stole?" "That's going to be complicated. She's been very sophisticated about hiding assets, and some of the money has been legitimately spent on business operations, albeit business operations that generated illegal profits. But the forensic accountants think they can recover at least 60% of your inheritance." 60% of $20 billion was still more money than most people could comprehend. But for Sophia, the actual amount was less important than what it represented: proof that she was who she said she was, validation that her story was true, acknowledgement that 20 years of her life had been stolen. "There's something else," Santos continued. "The other victims, the ones we found, they want to meet you. They want to thank the person who brought down the system that held them prisoner." That afternoon, in a secure conference room at FBI headquarters, Sophia came face to face with 3 people whose stories mirrored her own in heartbreaking detail. Margaret Chen, a tech heiress, who'd been declared mentally incompetent after questioning her guardian's business decisions. Robert Harrison, whose vast real estate fortune had been systematically looted while he was supposedly receiving treatment for early-onset dementia. And Anna Volkov, a young Russian oil heiress who'd been imprisoned since she was 16, now 31, and struggling to remember what life had been like before captivity. "I thought I was the only one," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "For 8 years, I thought I was going crazy, thought maybe they were right about me being mentally ill." "We all thought that," Robert added. His hands shook as he spoke, a side effect the doctors said of years of forced medication. That was part of their system. Isolate us, medicate us, make us doubt about sorrow, balastati. Anna, who spoke in heavily accented English, was the youngest, but seemed the most damaged. "I do not remember much from before. Sometimes I think maybe I imagine whole other life." Sophia reached across the table and took Anna's hand. "You didn't imagine it. You had a life before this, and you're going to have a life after it. We all are." The meeting was emotionally devastating, but also healing in ways Sophia hadn't expected. For 20 years, she'd carried the weight of Evelyn's gaslighting, the constant suggestion that her memories weren't real, that her perceptions couldn't be trusted. Sitting with these other survivors, sharing their stories, she felt the last of that psychological poison finally beginning to drain away. 2 weeks later, Crawford called with the news they'd all been waiting for. "Evelyn's been extradited," he said, his voice bright with triumph. "She's in federal custody in New York, and the grand jury has handed down indictments on 47 counts, including kidnapping, conspiracy fraud, and racketeering." What about her lawyers? The diplomatic immunity claim. Turned out the diplomatic passport was as fake as everything else in her life. Swiss authorities were happy to hand her over once they realized she'd been using their banks to launder stolen money. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Sophia felt something that had been missing since their flight from Fairplay, hope for the future. But the future, when it came, brought challenges none of them had anticipated. The media attention was overwhelming. Sophia's story had captured the public imagination in a way that made privacy impossible. Reporters camped outside the safe house, photographers used telephoto lenses to capture images of Emma playing in the secured backyard, and every detail of their lives became fodder for public consumption. "I can't take Emma to school without running a gauntlet of cameras," Daniel said, after another frustrating encounter with aggressive journalists. "She's 8 years old. She shouldn't have to deal with this." Agent Santos, who'd become not just their protector, but something approaching a friend, nodded sympathetically. "The media attention will die down eventually, but it's going to take time. High-profile cases like this tend to have long news cycles." "How much time?" Sophia asked. "Months. Maybe longer, especially once the trial starts." The trial. Sophia had been so focused on Evelyn's capture that she hadn't fully considered what would come next. Months of legal proceedings, testimony from victims, cross-examinations, designed to destroy her credibility. The defense would certainly argue that she was mentally ill, that her accusations were the product of delusion and psychiatric instability. "I'll have to testify," she said, the reality hitting her like a physical blow. "Multiple times," Santos confirmed. "Your testimony is crucial to the prosecution's case. Without it, Evelyn's lawyers might be able to create enough reasonable doubt to avoid conviction on the most serious charges." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in the next room, oblivious to the media circus surrounding their lives, Sophia and Daniel had the hardest conversation of their relationship. "Maybe you should take Emma and leave," Sophia said quietly. "Go somewhere far away, start over with new identities. She doesn't deserve to grow up as the daughter of the man who loved the crazy heiress." Daniel's response was immediate and fierce. "Don't you dare suggest that. Don't you dare try to push me away to protect me. I'm being practical, Daniel. This trial could last for years. Every detail of my life, every private moment, is going to be dissected in public. Emma's going to grow up knowing that her family is famous for all the wrong reasons. Emma's going to grow up knowing that her family fought for justice and won. She's going to know that when someone tried to hurt the people we love, we didn't run away or give up. But the cost of what? Of loving you, of fighting for the truth. Sophia, you've spent 20 years believing that you're not worth fighting for, that you're not worth protecting. But you're wrong. You're worth everything. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her, as she finally allowed herself to cry, not from fear or frustration, but from the overwhelming realization that she was truly, completely loved. The trial of Evelyn Graves began 6 months later in federal court in Manhattan. By then, Sophia had learned to navigate the constant media attention, to ignore the photographers and reporters who documented her every movement. More importantly, she'd learned to trust in her own strength, in the truth of her story, and in the love of the family that had chosen to stand by her. Emma, now 9 and startlingly mature for her age, had adapted to their new reality with the resilience that children often display in difficult circumstances. She'd become something of a celebrity at her new school in Denver, known as the girl whose family had caught the bad guys. Rather than being traumatized by the experience, she seemed to have internalized the lesson that good people fight back against injustice. "Are you nervous?" Daniel asked as they walked into the courthouse on the morning Sophia was scheduled to testify. "Terrified," Sophia admitted, "but also ready. I've been preparing for this moment my entire adult life, even when I didn't know it." The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and representatives from the other families whose loved ones had been victimized by Evelyn's network. When Sophia took the witness stand, she could see Evelyn sitting at the defense table, looking every bit the successful businesswoman she'd pretended to be for so many years. But when their eyes met, Sophia felt nothing but pity for the woman who'd stolen so much from so many people. Evelyn had wealth, power, and intelligence, but she'd never understood the one thing that had ultimately defeated her, the power of love to inspire people to fight back against even the most overwhelming odds. "Ms. Laurent," the prosecutor began, "please tell the jury about the night you were first taken from your home." For the next 3 hours, Sophia told her story. All of it. The drugged tea, the fake medical facility, the years of forced medication and isolation. The systematic theft of her inheritance, the creation of false medical records, the elaborate network of corruption that had enabled 20 years of imprisonment. The defense attorney, as expected, attacked her credibility relentlessly. He suggested that her memories were unreliable, that her supposed imprisonment was actually voluntary psychiatric treatment, that her accusations were the product of mental illness and a desire for attention. But Sophia was ready for every attack, every insinuation, every attempt to make her doubt her own reality. She'd been preparing for this cross-examination her entire life, and she wasn't going to let Evelyn's lawyers accomplish what Evelyn herself had failed to do, make her question the truth of her own experience. "Ms. Laurent," the defense attorney said during his final line of questioning, "isn't it true that you've been diagnosed with severe mental illness, that you've spent the last 20 years receiving treatment for conditions that make it impossible for you to distinguish between reality and fantasy?" Sophia looked directly at the jury as she answered, "Sir, I was diagnosed with mental illness by doctors who were being paid to declare me incompetent. I was treated for conditions I never had by people who profited from keeping me drugged and isolated. The only fantasy here is the one that allowed people to steal $20 billion while the world believed they were providing medical care." The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Financial records, testimony from other victims, evidence of the fake medical facilities' recordings of Evelyn's own admissions. The defense tried to create doubt, to suggest that the victims were confused or lying, but the sheer volume of evidence made their arguments appear desperate. When the jury returned their verdict after 3 days of deliberation, the word guilty was repeated 47 times, once for each count in the indictment. Evelyn Graves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would never again be in a position to steal someone's life for financial gain. Standing on the courthouse steps after the sentencing, surrounded by reporters and cameras, Sophia felt a sense of closure that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The woman who'd destroyed her life was going to spend the rest of her days in prison, and the system that had enabled such massive fraud was being dismantled piece by piece. "Ms. Laurent," a reporter called out, "what are your plans now? Will you be returning to Connecticut to take control of Laurent Industries?" Sophia looked at Daniel and Emma, who stood beside her like the family they'd chosen to become. "My plans are very simple," she said. "I'm going home with my husband and daughter to the life we've built together." "Husband!" another reporter shouted. "When did you get married?" Daniel stepped forward, taking Sophia's hand and showing off the simple gold band that had replaced the plastic promise ring from a truck stop vending machine. 3 days ago, in a private ceremony attended by the people who matter most to us. The questions came faster after that, but Sophia was no longer listening. She was thinking about the small wedding ceremony they'd held in Mrs. Whitmore's backyard, with Emma as maid of honor and Agent Santos as one of the witnesses. It hadn't been the grand society wedding her father might have planned for her, but it had been perfect in every way that mattered. They drove home to Colorado that afternoon, to the house that Daniel had rebuilt and expanded during the months of the trial. The media would follow them for a while longer, but eventually other stories would capture public attention, and they would be allowed to live the quiet life they'd always wanted. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Emma curled up between them reading a book about horses, Sophia reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" she asked Daniel. "If you'd just driven past me on the highway?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think you would have found another way to survive, to escape, to reclaim your life. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Sophia. You always were." "But would we have found each other?" "Maybe not the same way," Daniel admitted. "But I like to think that somehow, somewhere we would have. Some connections are too strong to be left to chance." Emma looked up from her book. "Are you guys being mushy again?" "Absolutely," Sophia said, pulling the little girl closer. "We're very mushy people." "Good," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Mushy people are the best kind." As the stars emerged over the Colorado sky, Sophia felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. She was no longer the confused woman who'd been found wandering on a rain-soaked highway. She was no longer the victim of someone else's greed and cruelty. She was Sophia Hayes, wife and mother survivor and fighter woman, who'd reclaimed not just her inheritance but her identity, her freedom, and her right to choose her own path forward. The Laurent Foundation, which she'd established using her recovered inheritance, was already making a difference in the lives of guardianship abuse victims around the world. The Willowbrook facility had been shut down, its fake staff arrested its victims, relocated to legitimate treatment facilities. Other families were being reunited, other stolen lives were being reclaimed. But tonight, sitting on her porch with her husband and daughter Sophia, wasn't thinking about foundations or justice or the larger implications of their victory. She was thinking about how Daniel made his coffee in the morning, about Emma's laugh when she was truly happy about the way their house smelled like home and safety and unconditional love. She was thinking about the life they'd built together one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time, and how it was worth more than all the money Evelyn had stolen, worth more than any inheritance or legacy or public recognition. She was thinking about how love, real love, was the one thing that no one could ever take away from you, not with drugs or lawyers or elaborate conspiracies. It was the one treasure that grew stronger when shared, the one force that could overcome even the most carefully constructed systems of control and oppression. As Daniel reached over to squeeze her hand, and Emma snuggled closer with a contented sigh, Sophia realized that this was what victory looked like. Not a courtroom triumph or a media vindication, but a quiet evening with the people she loved most, in the place where she truly belonged. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The mountains stood sentinel in the darkness, and the Hayes family, Sophia, Daniel, and Emma, settled into the peaceful routine of people who'd fought for their happiness and won. In the end, that was the only victory that mattered.